Hey guys, tonight we begin with dope Choir Legions, Enter Rome, Empire Legion Trails, Ancient Rome, Ancient Res, and at least from 2. You're standing just outside the gates of a medieval city, the kind you've probably imagined as lively, crowded, maybe even a little romantic. But as you take your first slow breath, you realize something immediately. This place is not going to be kind to your nose. In fact, if you were suddenly dropped here for real, there's a good chance you wouldn't survive the week, not because of danger or violence, but because your senses would be completely overwhelmed before lunch. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from, along with your local time. It's always fascinating to see how many different corners of the world gather here for these slow nighttime journeys through history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward. The city gate looms above you, tall, heavy, and worn from years of use. Guards stand nearby, not paying much attention as people pass in and out. There's movement everywhere. Merchants, travelers, workers, all flowing through the entrance like a slow-moving river. And then it hits you. Not all at once, but gradually. A smell. At first, it's faint, just a hint of something off. But with each step you take inside the city walls, it grows stronger, more complex, more layered. It's not just one smell, it's many. Earthy, sour, slightly sweet in an uncomfortable way. A sharp edge of something that makes you instinctively want to breathe a little less deeply. You pause for a moment, your body unsure how to react, because your brain is trying to categorize it, and failing. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval cities, especially between the 11th and 14th centuries, were densely populated spaces with limited sanitation systems. Waste disposal, animal presence, and lack of infrastructure all contributed to persistent and often overwhelming odors. You don't know all that yet, of course. You just know this is different. You take another step. The ground beneath your feet is uneven. Packed dirt mixed with patches of straw and darker areas that you quickly decide not to examine too closely. People move around you without hesitation, as if nothing is unusual, which tells you something important. This is normal. For them, you glance around, trying to match what you're seeing with what you're smelling. Buildings rise on either side of the narrow street wooden frames, leaning slightly, their upper floor sometimes extending outward over the road. They're close. Very close. Close enough that in some places it feels like the sky is just a thin strip above you, and that closeness traps everything. The air doesn't move much here. It lingers. You notice a cart rolling past, pulled by a horse that doesn't seem particularly concerned about where it steps. Its hooves press into the soft ground, leaving behind impressions that quickly blend into everything else already there. The smell intensifies as it passes. You instinctively turn your head slightly, but there's nowhere to escape it. It's everywhere. A quirky detail that might surprise you is that medieval people didn't necessarily find these smells as shocking as you do. Their senses were used to it. In fact, strong smells were often associated with everyday life, and sometimes even believed to carry certain meanings or effects. Historians still argue whether people in the medieval period were fully desensitized to these conditions, or simply tolerated them because they had no alternative. Either way, what feels overwhelming to you is just another day for them. You take a slow breath, trying to adjust. It doesn't work. But you keep walking anyway, because that's what everyone else is doing. There's a rhythm here, a steady movement of life that doesn't pause for discomfort. People talk, trade, carry goods, tend to tasks, all while surrounded by this invisible, ever-present layer of scent. You pass by a doorway where someone is emptying a small container onto the street. You don't see exactly what's inside, but you don't need to. The smell tells you enough. It joins the rest, blends in, becomes part of the background. You hesitate for just a fraction of a second, then continue forward, stepping carefully around a darker patch of ground that seems slightly wetter than the rest. Your awareness sharpens. You start noticing patterns, where to step, where not to step, how people move around obstacles without even looking down. It's like learning a new language, except this one is written on the ground and in the air. You glance upward again, hoping for a bit of fresh air from above, but the narrowness of the street limits even that. The buildings seem to lean in, holding everything close, keeping the smells contained. It's not suffocating, not exactly, but it's constant, unavoidable, and strangely consistent. There's no sudden change, no moment of relief, just a steady presence. You pass a group of people gathered near a stall, talking casually as if nothing is unusual. One of them laughs, another gestures, with a piece of bread in hand. Life continues, uninterrupted. And that's when it starts to settle in. This isn't temporary. This isn't an accident. This is the environment. You take another slow breath, and this time, something changes. Not the smell, but your reaction to it. It's still unpleasant, still unfamiliar, but it doesn't shock you the same way it did a few moments ago. You're adjusting already. And that realization is both fascinating and a little unsettling, because it means that given enough time, even something like this becomes normal. You continue walking deeper into the city, the sounds of daily life growing slightly louder, the movement more crowded, the air more layered. And as you move further in, one quiet thought settles into your mind. If this is what the city smells like just inside the gates, then what does it smell like deeper in? Because something tells you you haven't even reached the worst of it yet. You keep walking. The gate is now behind you, its heavy wooden doors fading into the distance as the city slowly closes in around you. The street narrows even more, almost as if it's gently squeezing you forward, guiding you deeper into its maze. And with every step, the smell changes. Not better, just different. It thickens, becomes heavier, more layered, like the air itself is carrying stories you're not entirely sure you want to understand. The path beneath your feet grows softer in places, uneven in others. What looked like simple dirt from a distance now reveals itself as something far more complicated, a mixture of mud, straw, spilled liquids, scraps, and things you carefully avoid identifying. You step around a patch that glistens slightly in the dim light. Instinct, already improving. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval city streets were rarely paved, especially in smaller towns. Even in larger cities, paving was limited and often poorly maintained. Without proper drainage systems, waste and rainwater would mix together, creating muddy and unsanitary conditions. You feel that now. Every step is a decision. Every movement requires a bit more attention than you're used to. You notice how people around you walk with quiet precision. They don't look down constantly, but their feet seem to know where to go. They glide around obstacles, stepping over or around patches without hesitation. They've learned the rhythm, and you're still trying to catch up. A cart rumbles past you again, its wooden wheels cutting deep grooves into the soft ground. The sound is slow and heavy creak, crunch, creak. As it rolls by, it pushes aside layers of mud and whatever else lies beneath, releasing a fresh wave of scent into the air. You pause slightly, letting it pass. Bad idea, because standing still makes it worse. The air settles, becomes thicker. You quickly realize that moving even slowly is better than stopping. So you continue forward. The buildings on either side feel closer now, leaning inward like quiet observers. Some upper floors extend over the street, almost touching each other in places. If you stretched your arms out far enough, you might brush both sides. That closeness traps everything. Air doesn't flow freely here, it lingers. And so do the smells. You pass a small pile of refuse gathered near the edge of the road. It's not neatly placed, just collected. Bits of food, broken items, scraps of cloth, and things that have clearly been there for a while. No one seems particularly concerned, because this isn't unusual. A quirky historical detail is that many medieval cities had no formal garbage collection system. Instead, people often disposed of waste in nearby streets or designated corners where it would sit until it was naturally moved, decomposed, or occasionally cleared away. You look at the pile again. Occasionally feels like a generous word. You keep walking. A dog darts past you, nose low to the ground, investigating everything with intense focus. It stops briefly near one of the piles, then moves on, seemingly satisfied. Life finds a way. Even here, you step carefully again, noticing how the ground changes texture every few feet. Some areas are firmer, packed down by constant foot traffic. Others are softer, almost sticky, as if they've absorbed too much over time. You avoid those, At least, you try to. You glance ahead and see a slight slope in the road. It dips downward just a little, creating a shallow path where liquid rainwater, waste, everything else slowly flows. It's not a sewer. Not really. Just a natural channel formed by years of use. You watch as a thin stream moves along it, carrying bits of debris with it. It doesn't look fast, but it's steady. Historians still argue whether these informal drainage systems were seen as effective solutions or simply unavoidable consequences of city life. Some believe they were intentionally maintained, while others think they developed naturally over time without much planning. Either way, they're doing something, just not enough. You step over the narrow stream, careful not to get too close. The smell near it is sharper, more concentrated, as if everything unpleasant has gathered in one place. Your nose wrinkles slightly, but again, less than before. You're adjusting. And that realization quietly settles in again. You pass a group of children playing near the side of the street. They laugh, chase each other, completely unfazed by their surroundings. One of them steps directly through a muddy patch without hesitation, then keeps running as if nothing happened. No pause, no concern, just movement. It's normal for them. You slow your pace slightly, taking in more details now. A doorway here, a small window there, a piece of cloth hanging out to dry. Everything feels lived in, used, part of an ongoing cycle. Nothing feels clean, but nothing feels neglected either. It's just maintained differently. You notice how people occasionally throw small amounts of straw onto the ground. At first it seems random, but then you realize what it's doing. Absorbing, covering, helping manage the surface, even if only temporarily. A simple solution, not perfect, but practical. You take another careful step, your boots pressing into a slightly softer area, and you feel a faint resistance before lifting your foot again. Yes, definitely learning. The sounds around you continue, the low murmur of voices, the creak of wood, the distant clatter of tools. It all blends together into a steady background hum, almost soothing if you ignore everything else. Almost. You look ahead and notice the street becoming even narrower, curving slightly out of view. The buildings seem older here, darker, their surfaces marked by years of smoke, weather, and contact. And the air feels heavier again. You take a slow breath, preparing yourself, because if this is what the main path looks like, then the smaller streets might be even worse. And as you step forward into the narrowing curve, one quiet thought follows you. The deeper you go, the less this city is going to let you forget what it really is. You follow the narrowing street as it curves gently to the side, and almost without realizing it, you step into a part of the city where things feel less organized, less maintained, less forgiving. The path beneath your feet shifts again. It's no longer just uneven. It feels deliberately shaped in places, like someone once tried to guide the flow of something through it. And then you see it. Running along the edge of the street is a shallow channel. Not deep, not covered, not particularly impressive. Just there. A thin stream of murky liquid moves slowly through it, carrying bits of debris along the way. It doesn't rush. It doesn't hurry. It simply exists. And the smell near it is sharper than anything you've encountered so far. You instinctively lean slightly away from it as you walk, giving it space, even though that space is limited. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval cities lacked underground sewer systems like the ones you're familiar with today. Instead, many relied on open gutters, simple channels along the streets, designed to carry away wastewater, rain, and whatever else ended up in them. This is one of those gutters, and it's doing its job. Just not in a way you'd call pleasant. You watch as something small and indistinguishable, but definitely not clean, floats past. Caught in the slow current, it bumps gently against the side of the channel, then continues on, disappearing around a bend. Nothing stops it. Nothing filters it. It just moves. You step carefully, keeping your distance, but the street is narrow enough that you can't avoid it completely. The air above the gutter carries a concentrated version of everything you've been smelling since entering the city. Stronger, more focused. It's like the city has decided to gather all its unpleasantness into one place and let it flow right beside you. You pass by a doorway where someone empties a small bucket into the gutter without ceremony. The liquid joins the stream, blending in instantly, becoming part of the whole. No hesitation, no reaction, just routine. A quirky historical tidbit is that some medieval towns had informal rules about when waste could be dumped into the streets, often early in the morning or late at night to minimize inconvenience. Of course, how closely people follow these rules is another question entirely. You suspect the answer is not very. Historians still argue whether these open gutter systems were considered effective solutions or simply the best available option at the time. Some cities attempted more structured drainage, but most relied on these simple channels and the natural slope of the land. And right now, you're walking right beside one. You notice how the ground near the gutter is darker, wetter, more worn down. Footsteps have carved subtle paths around it, showing where people prefer to walk. You follow those paths instinctively, learning, adapting. The buildings here feel older, their wooden frames slightly warped, their surfaces marked by years of exposure. The overhanging upper floors block even more light, casting long shadows across the street. It's dimmer, more enclosed, and the air feels heavier because of it. You take a slow breath carefully this time, and realize something. You're not reacting as strongly as before. The smell is still there, still unpleasant, but your body isn't resisting it as much. It's adjusting. Again, you pass another gutter crossing where a narrow plank has been placed across the channel, allowing people to step over without getting too close. You use it, balancing briefly before stepping onto firmer ground on the other side. Simple solution, effective enough. You glance back for a moment, watching how others cross without even thinking about it. Some don't even use the plank, they just step over the narrowest part of the gutter with practiced ease. This is their environment. They're normal. You continue forward, noticing how the gutter occasionally widens or narrows depending on the shape of the street. In some places, it almost disappears, only to reappear a few steps later. It's not a perfectly planned system. It's evolving, adapting to the city rather than the other way around. You hear a faint splash behind you and turn slightly to see a small object again. Not something you want to identify, drop into the channel from above. You glance upward. A window. Someone briefly visible, then gone. No apology, no warning, just another addition to the flow. You take a small step forward, just in case. Because now you understand something important. The gutter isn't the only source. Everything feeds into it. You move a little faster now, not rushing, but with purpose, following the slightly drier, slightly safer parts of the path. Your awareness is sharper, your movements more precise. You're learning the system, even if you don't like it. You notice a bend ahead where the gutter curves around a corner, disappearing from view. The street continues, but the channel slips away, taking its concentrated stream with it. The air shifts slightly as you move past it. Not clean, but less intense. You take a deeper breath this time, testing the difference. It's subtle, but noticeable, and for a brief moment it almost feels like relief. But that feeling doesn't last long, because as you continue walking, you realize something else. If the gutters carry waste away, then they have to lead somewhere. Somewhere bigger, somewhere where everything gathers. And as you glance ahead into the deeper, more crowded parts of the city, one quiet thought settles in your mind. You've seen how the city moves its waste, but you haven't yet seen where it all comes from. And something tells you that part might be even closer than you think. You move a little more carefully now, not just watching the ground, but also glancing upward every now and then. Because after that small splash behind you, you've realized something important about this city. Things don't just come from below, they come from above too. The street narrows even further as you continue, the buildings leaning in so closely that they almost seem to whisper to each other across the gap. Wooden beams creak softly overhead, and small windows, some open, some covered, dot the walls on either side. And those windows are not just for light. You hear it before you see it. A faint scraping sound, a shift of movement above. Then, just ahead of you, someone near the side of the street suddenly steps a little faster, instinctively moving out of the way. You follow their lead without even thinking. A second later, something is thrown from a window. It lands with a dull, unpleasant splash against the ground, spreading slightly before settling into the already layered surface of the street. No announcement, no warning. Just routine. You stop for a moment, your mind catching up to what you've just witnessed. A mainstream historical fact. is that in many medieval cities, people used chamber pots inside their homes and then disposed of the contents by throwing them out into the street. In some places, it was customary to shout a warning beforehand, but this wasn't always followed. You look up again, half expecting to see someone leaning out, but the window is already closed, gone, as if nothing happened. You take a slow breath carefully and step around the fresh addition, choosing your footing with even more precision now, because suddenly the ground isn't your only concern. You keep walking, but now there's a new layer of awareness. You listen for movement above. You watch for shadows near windows. You read the behavior of people ahead of you, when they shift, when they speed up, when they subtly move away from certain areas. It's like learning a second language, one that's spoken in gestures and instincts. A quirky historical tidbit is that in some cities, people were supposed to call out warnings like "Gardes l'eau," which loosely meant "watch out for the water," before dumping waste. But as you've just seen, not everyone followed that polite tradition. You can't help but think that the word water is doing a lot of work in that sentence. You continue forward, stepping lightly. Your senses now split between ground and sky, and you notice something else. The smell here is fresher, not better, just newer, stronger in a sharper way, as if it hasn't had time to blend into the rest of the environment yet. It stands out for a moment, then slowly fades into the background, becoming part of the whole. You pass by another doorway, where someone carries a small container outside. They pause briefly, glance around, not in guilt, but in habit, then tip the contents onto the edge of the street, where it slowly seeps toward the nearest gutter. More subtle, but the same result. Everything finds its way down. Historians still argue whether these practices were seen as problematic by the people living at the time, or simply accepted as unavoidable parts of urban life. Some records show attempts to regulate waste disposal, while others suggest that enforcement was inconsistent at best. From what you can see, it depends on the moment. You step around another patch. Your movement's smoother now, more confident. You're no longer hesitating with every step. You're reading the street, anticipating patterns, adjusting without thinking. You're adapting. Again, you glance upward once more, this time noticing how some windows have small wooden extensions or ledges beneath them, perhaps to make it easier to pour things out, or to keep them from splashing back. Either way, they're part of the system. You pass beneath one quickly, just in case. The street opens slightly ahead, giving you a bit more space to breathe. The buildings pull back just enough to let in a little more light, and for a moment, the air feels less trapped. You take advantage of it. A deeper breath. Still not pleasant, but manageable. You notice a few people standing near the edge of the street, talking casually. One of them steps aside as someone from above empties a container, this time with a quick shout that you don't quite catch. A warning. Late but present. The group barely reacts. They've seen this before. You're the only one still adjusting. You continue forward, your pace steady, your awareness now fully tuned to this environment. You're no longer just observing, you're participating, avoiding, navigating, surviving in your own quiet way. And as you move deeper into the city, one thought begins to settle more clearly in your mind. If this is how people deal with waste inside their homes, and how they dispose of it outside, then the smell of this city isn't coming from one place. It's coming from everywhere. Every window, every doorway, every step, all feeding into the same system. And as you glance ahead toward a slightly busier part of the street, where more movement, more noise, and more life seem to gather, you realize something quietly unsettling. You haven't even started looking at the animals yet. And something tells you they're about to add a whole new layer to this experience. You move forward again, a little more alert now, your eyes no longer focused on just the ground or the windows, but scanning everything. Because the city isn't just made of people, it's alive in a different way. You hear it before you fully notice it. A low grunt, a shuffle, the uneven rhythm of hooves against soft ground. And then, as the street opens slightly, you see them, animals. Not one or two, but many. A pig wanders slowly across your path, completely unbothered by your presence. Its nose stays close to the ground, sniffing, searching, nudging through whatever it finds. Behind it, a couple of chickens dart between footsteps, pecking at invisible treasures. and further ahead, a horse stands still, attached to a cart, shifting its weight from one leg to another. You pause for just a moment, because suddenly the smell makes more sense. A mainstream historical fact is that animals commonly lived within medieval cities, not just in the countryside. Pigs, chickens, goats and horses were all part of daily urban life, often roaming freely through the streets. There were no separate zones, no clear boundaries. Humans and animals shared the same space, and everything that came with them stayed in that space too. You step carefully around the pig, giving it just enough room to continue its slow, determined search. It doesn't acknowledge you. It doesn't need to. You're the one adjusting. Not it. A quirky historical detail is that pigs were sometimes allowed to roam freely in cities because they helped clean up waste by eating scraps. In a way, they acted like living garbage collectors, though not exactly in the cleanest sense. You watch as the pig nudges something along the ground, sniffs it, then moves on. Efficient, but not reassuring. You continue walking, and the sounds around you grow slightly louder. Hooves tapping, chickens clucking, a distant bark from a dog somewhere further down the street. The city has a rhythm, and animals are part of it. You pass by the horse again, this time closer. It exhales slowly, a warm breath visible in the cooler air. Beneath it, the ground is darker, more worn, more active. You don't need to look too closely. You already understand. And that smell, that strong, earthy, unmistakable layer, it's coming from here too. Everywhere, really. You step around it, your movement smooth now, almost automatic. You've learned enough to avoid the obvious. But the subtle parts, those still find you. Historians still argue whether medieval cities attempted to regulate animals effectively or simply accepted their presence as necessary. Some records show efforts to control wandering livestock, especially pigs, while others suggest enforcement was inconsistent. Looking around, you'd say inconsistent feels accurate. You notice a group of chickens gathering near a pile of scraps, pecking quickly, competing with each other in short bursts of movement. A child nearby watches them, occasionally tossing another small piece toward the group. It's a system, loose, unstructured, but functioning. You walk past a narrow side alley where the smell intensifies briefly, then fades as you return to the main path. In the alley you catch a glimpse of something moving, a goat, perhaps, tethered loosely, shifting its position. Even the quieter corners of the city are shared. You step forward again, and your foot lands a little too close to something you were trying to avoid. Not directly in it, but close enough that you feel the softness, the slight give beneath your boot. You pause, just for a second, then keep going, because stopping doesn't help. You glance around to see if anyone noticed. No one did. Or if they did, they didn't care. This is normal. You're the one who's new here. You move on, your pace steady again, your awareness now fully adjusted to this new layer of the environment. The smells you noticed before, those from the gutters, from the windows, they're still here. But now they're mixed with something else. Something constant, something living. You pass by another cart, this one loaded with goods, pulled slowly by a pair of oxen. Their movement is slow, deliberate, their hooves pressing deep into the soft ground with each step. Behind them, a trail. Not hidden, not cleaned, just there. And the cartwheels roll through it, blending it into everything else. You step aside to let them pass, giving yourself as much space as the narrow street allows. As they move by, the air shifts again, carrying with it a fresh wave of scent that briefly stands out before merging into the background, layer upon layer. That's what this city is. Not one smell, but many, all overlapping, all constant. You continue forward, and the crowd thickens slightly. More people, more movement, more activity. And with that, more animals too. A dog brushes past your leg, quick and focused, chasing something only it can see. It disappears into the crowd just as quickly as it appeared. You barely react. Not because you don't notice, but because you're getting used to it, and that realization comes again, quietly, in the background. You're adapting to the smells, to the movement, to the presence of things that, not long ago, would have made you stop completely. Now, you just keep walking, and as you move deeper into the city, one thought begins to form more clearly. If animals are adding this much to the environment, and people are contributing in their own ways, then the places where food is handled, sold, and prepared must be something else entirely, because where there is food, there is always waste. And where there is waste, in a city like this, the smell is never far behind. You follow the flow of people, and without really deciding to, you find yourself drifting toward a busier part of the city. The sounds change first. Voices become louder, more layered. There's a steady rhythm of movement, footsteps, carts, animals, all blending into a kind of slow, constant motion. And then the space opens. Not wide, but wider. You've reached a market. Stalls line both sides of the street. Simple wooden tables covered with goods, vegetables, grains, bread, bits of meat, things stacked, hanging, arranged as neatly as possible. At first glance, it almost feels lively, colourful even, but then you breathe in, and a smell shifts again, not sharper like the gutters, not heavy like the animals, but something in between, a mix of fresh and not so fresh. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval markets were central to daily life, supplying food and goods to the urban population. However, without refrigeration or modern preservation methods, food often spoiled quickly, especially in crowded, warm conditions. You can sense that immediately. Some of the produce looks fine, fresh enough, recently brought in, but other items have clearly been here for a while. You notice a pile of vegetables slightly wilted at the edges, their surfaces softening. Nearby, a basket of fruit shows subtle signs of age, small dark spots, faint wrinkles. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable. And then there's the smell, not overwhelming, but present. You walk slowly past a stall where a vendor rearranges items with practiced hands. He doesn't seem concerned about the condition of the goods. He adjusts them, rotates them, makes them look presentable. Because this is how it works. Use what you have, sell what you can. You step a little closer, observing the details. Flies hover lazily above some of the food, occasionally landing, then lifting again. No one seems particularly bothered. A quirky historical tidbit is that flies were an almost constant presence in medieval markets, especially around food. Without effective ways to keep them away, people simply accepted them as part of the environment. You watch one land briefly, then move on. Again, normal. You continue walking, passing from one stall to another. Each has its own scent, its own small contribution to the overall atmosphere. Grain smells dry and earthy. Bread carries a faint warmth, though some loaves look a bit too firm. Vegetables add a subtle sharpness, especially where they've begun to soften. And underneath it all, a quiet hint of decay. Not strong, not immediate, but always there. Historians still argue whether medieval people were as concerned about food freshness as modern consumers are, or whether their expectations were simply different due to necessity. Most agree that while people preferred fresh food, they were far more accustomed to consuming items that were slightly past their prime. You can see that here. People examine, choose, purchase without hesitation. You pause briefly near a stall where scraps have fallen to the ground. Bits of leaves, small pieces of food, things that didn't make it onto the table or didn't sell. They gather near the edges, mixing with the already layered surface of the street. And once again, nothing goes to waste. Not really. Because those scraps don't stay untouched for long. A chicken darts in, pecking quickly, grabbing what it can before moving on. A moment later, a dog approaches, sniffing, searching for anything left behind. It's a cycle. Fast, efficient, not clean, but effective in its own way. You step around the area, your movements smooth now, your awareness fully tuned to these patterns. You're not surprised anymore, just observant. You move deeper into the market, where the crowd thickens slightly. People brush past each other, exchanging goods, coins, brief conversations. There's a sense of routine here, of daily necessity. Food must be bought, sold, used, no matter the conditions. You pass by another stall where a vendor cuts into a piece of food, examining it briefly before setting it aside. The knife moves from one item to another without pause. No washing, no separation, just continuity. You notice it, but no one else reacts. Because again, this is normal. You take a slow breath, and the mix of smells settles around you. Food, people, animals, the street itself. It all blends into a single, complex layer that's hard to separate. You're no longer trying to. You're just experiencing it. You move toward the edge of the market where the stalls thin out and the street begins to narrow again. The air shifts slightly as you leave the densest part of the crowd, but the scent of the market lingers behind you, following for a few steps before fading. Not disappearing, just blending back into everything else. And as you step away, one thought begins to form more clearly. If this is how food is sold, handled, and left behind, then the places where animals are processed, where meat is prepared, must carry a much stronger presence. Because unlike vegetables, those places don't just deal with spoilage, they deal with something else entirely. And something tells you you're about to walk straight into it. You don't have to search for it. The change finds you first. As you move away from the market stalls, following a slightly wider path, the smell shifts again, but this time it arrives more suddenly, less gradual, less layered, more direct. You notice it in the air before you fully see the source. A heavier scent. Thicker, not exactly rotten, but not fresh either. You slow your steps just slightly, your body reacting before your mind fully catches up. And then you see it. A wooden structure along the side of the street, open at the front with hooks, tables and darkened surfaces that have clearly been used many times before. A butcher's stall. A mainstream historical fact is that in medieval cities, butchers often worked in open-air shops, preparing meat directly within the marketplace or nearby streets. Without refrigeration, meat had to be processed and sold quickly, often in full view of the public. You take a careful step closer, not too close, just enough to observe. Pieces of meat hang from hooks, some freshly cut, others slightly darker, their surfaces beginning to change. A man works behind the table, his movements steady and practiced. A blade rises and falls with quiet rhythm. There's no rush, no urgency, just routine. And beneath the table, the ground tells the rest of the story. It's darker here, not just from mud or general wear, but from repeated use, from things that have soaked into the surface over time. You don't stare, but you notice. A quirky historical tidbit is that butchers were sometimes required to operate in specific areas of a city, partly to contain the mess and smell. However, enforcement varied widely, and many stalls still operated close to busy streets. From what you can see, this one is exactly where life is happening. You take another slow breath, and the scent confirms what your eyes already suggest. It's not just the presence of meat, it's the process itself. Fresh cuts, lingering traces, a constant cycle of preparation and sale. You shift your weight slightly, choosing your next step carefully, avoiding the darker patches near the stall. Your movements are smoother now, almost automatic. You've learned enough to navigate. But this is different. Historians still argue whether medieval people were significantly bothered by these conditions, or whether familiarity reduced the impact. Some believe that exposure made such environments feel ordinary, while others suggest that discomfort was simply endured as part of daily life. You glance at the people nearby. They don't seem disturbed. They talk, purchase, move on. For them, this is just another stop in the day. You take a few steps forward, passing the stall, but the smell follows for a moment before slowly fading into the background. Not gone, just less intense. You notice a narrow channel along the side of the street again. Another gutter, this one slightly darker, carrying more than just water. It moves slowly, quietly, taking with it whatever flows into it from places like this. You watch it for a second, then look away, because now you understand something. The gutters you saw earlier, this is where some of it begins. You continue walking, and the sounds shift again. The rhythmic chopping fades behind you, replaced by the softer hum of conversation and movement. But the memory of that space lingers, not just visually, but atmospherically. You pass another stall further down, smaller, less active but similar in purpose. The same setup, the same patterns, the same contribution to the environment around it. It's not isolated, it's part of the system. You step around a small patch near the edge of the road, your movement fluid now, your awareness constant, but no longer overwhelming. You've adjusted to the streets, to the gutters, to the animals, to the market, and now to this. Layer by layer, piece by piece, the city is revealing itself. You take a slow breath, and for a moment, you realize something unexpected. It doesn't shock you anymore. not the way it did at the gate. The smells are still there, still complex, still far from pleasant, but your reaction has changed. You're not resisting it, you're moving through it. And that quiet shift settles in your mind, because it means something important. Given enough time, even this becomes normal. You continue forward, leaving the butcher's area behind, the air slowly shifting back to its familiar, layered state. But as you walk, one thought begins to form again, connecting everything you've seen so far. Waste in the streets, gutters carrying it away, animals adding to it, food breaking down, meat being prepared, all of it moving, flowing, mixing, and eventually going somewhere, because nothing here disappears. It only changes location, and as you glance ahead, toward a part of the city where the buildings seem closer to a water source, a well, perhaps, or a small stream, you begin to realize something quietly unsettling. If everything flows, then some of it must end up there, where people drink, where they gather water, where life continues. And that thought, that quiet connection, makes you wonder if the next part of this journey might be even more uncomfortable than anything you've experienced so far. You follow the subtle shift in the street, but, almost without thinking, the path begins to slope slightly downward, the ground becoming firmer in places where countless footsteps have pressed it flat over time. The air feels different here, not cleaner, just cooler, and then you hear it, a faint sound. Water, not rushing, not flowing strongly, just a quiet, steady presence somewhere ahead. You move toward it, your pace calm but curious, and soon the street opens into a small gathering space, a break in the tight maze of buildings. At the center of it, a well, stone-lined, worn smooth at the edges, surrounded by a few wooden buckets and the gentle rhythm of daily use. A couple of people stand nearby, lowering a rope, pulling it back up, filling containers with practiced ease. This is where water comes from. A mainstream historical fact is that most medieval city residents relied on wells, rivers, or public fountains for their daily water supply. These sources were essential, but often vulnerable to contamination due to the surrounding environment. You step a little closer, careful with your footing, your senses already alert, because now you're starting to connect things. The streets, the gutters, the waste, all of it moving somewhere. You glance at the ground around the well. It's damp, not unusual for a place where water is constantly drawn, but there's more to it. The surface carries the same layered texture you've seen elsewhere, only here it's mixed with spilled water, forming a thin, slick coating. You take a careful step, then another. The smell here is confusing. Not as strong as the butcher's area, not as mixed as the market, but still present, lingering. A faint trace of everything you've encountered so far. You watch as someone lifts a bucket from the well, the rope creaking softly. The water inside looks clear enough at a glance. It reflects the dim light, catching a hint of brightness before settling again. Nothing about it immediately suggests danger. And yet, you hesitate. A quirky historical tidbit is that in some medieval cities, wells were occasionally located dangerously close to areas where waste accumulated, increasing the risk of contamination. In some cases, people even unknowingly polluted their own water sources. You look around, the narrow streets leading into this space, the gutters you passed not long ago, the way the land slopes gently toward this point. It doesn't take much imagination to see how things might travel. Slowly, quietly, unnoticed. Historians still argue how aware medieval populations were of water contamination and its connection to illness. While some understood that foul-smelling water was unsafe, the deeper connection between waste and disease was not fully understood. Which means, for most people here, this is just water. You watch as one of the villagers drinks from a small cup, casually, without concern. Another fills a container and carries it away, likely to be used for cooking, cleaning, or drinking later. Life depends on this. And so, it continues. You step a little closer, peering into the well. The water sits below, still and quiet, reflecting the rough stone walls that surround it. It looks calm, almost peaceful, a contrast to everything around it, but that calm surface doesn't tell the full story. You straighten slightly, taking a slow breath, and again you notice the faint blending of scents in the air. It's not strong enough to overwhelm, but it's there. A reminder. You step back, giving the well a bit more space, your instincts guiding you even if your mind hasn't fully processed every detail. Because now, something has shifted. It's not just about the smells anymore. It's about what they represent, where they go, what they affect. You turn slightly, looking at the paths leading away from the well. People come and go, carrying water, moving with purpose. No hesitation, no second thoughts. This is routine, essential, unquestioned. You follow one of the paths again, leaving the small gathering space behind. The sounds of the well fade, replaced once more by the steady rhythm of the city. But something stays with you, a quiet awareness, because now you understand that the smell of this place isn't just unpleasant. It's connected to everything: the streets, the gutters, the animals, the markets, the butchers. All of it feeds into the same environment, and sometimes into the same water. You take another slow breath as you move forward, the air settling around you once more in its familiar, layered way. And this time, you don't just notice the smell, you understand it a little better. And as that realization settles in, another thought begins to form. If the water itself carries traces of this environment, and people rely on it every day, then the effects of this city go far beyond what you can smell, because what you can smell is only part of the story, and what you can't might matter even more. You leave the well behind, but the thought of it lingers quietly in your mind, not in a dramatic way, just present, like something you've noticed but aren't quite ready to fully process. The street narrows again as you move forward, the buildings closing in just enough to return that familiar sense of enclosure. The air settles back into its layered rhythm waste, animals, food, damp earth all blending into something that now feels strangely consistent. And then something shifts again, not in the environment this time, but in the people. You start to notice it slowly, as individuals pass by you brushing shoulders, stepping around you, moving through their routines. You become aware of another layer in the air, closer, more personal. You catch it in brief moments, a passing figure, a shared space, a slight turn of the head. And there it is, a human scent, not strong enough to stand out on its own, but present enough to be noticed. A mainstream historical fact is that regular bathing was not as common in medieval Europe as it is today, especially in later periods. While bathing practices did exist, access, beliefs, and changing cultural attitudes meant that many people bathed infrequently by modern standards. You don't need to know the history to sense it. You feel it in proximity, in closeness, in the way people move through the same spaces, wearing the same clothes, living in the same environment, day after day. You pass by a man carrying a bundle of something over his shoulder. As he moves past you, there's a brief moment where the air shifts, and you notice a slightly heavier scent, earthy, warm, mixed with everything else around it. It's not overwhelming, just there. You keep walking. A quirky historical tidbit is that public bathhouses were actually quite popular in earlier medieval periods, but over time, especially in certain regions, their use declined due to changing social attitudes and concerns about health or morality. You glance around. There are no signs of anything like that here. No spaces that suggest regular washing, just daily life. Layered, continuous. Historians still argue whether medieval people were significantly less hygienic than modern stereotypes suggest, or whether their practices were simply different and shaped by available resources. Some evidence suggests people valued cleanliness but had limited means to achieve it regularly. You can sense that balance, because the people around you don't appear unaware. They're not ignoring it. They're just living with it. You notice clothing now, not in detail but in repetition. The same garments, worn again and again. Thick fabrics, practical, built for durability rather than comfort. They carry the environment with them, absorbing the air, the work, the day. You pass a woman adjusting a cloth around her shoulders. As she moves, the fabric shifts slightly, releasing a faint scent into the air. Again, not strong, but noticeable. You keep moving, your steps steady, your awareness no longer overwhelmed but quietly observant. This is just another layer, another part of the system. You realize something subtle. The smell of the city isn't just in the streets. It's carried by the people, from their homes, their work, their surroundings. Everything blends together. You step around another patch on the ground, your movement automatic now, and pass a small group standing close together in conversation. Their voices are low, relaxed, their posture casual. They don't seem uncomfortable, not with each other, not with the space, because for them this is normal distance, normal interaction. You pass through their space briefly, and for a moment that human layer becomes more noticeable, then fades again as you move on. You take a slow breath, and for the first time you realize something a little strange. It's not as difficult as it was at the beginning. Your body isn't reacting the same way. Your mind isn't pushing back. You've adapted again. You walk a little further, the rhythm of your steps matching the quiet flow of the city. The smells are still there, unchanged, constant, but your relationship to them has shifted. They're no longer interruptions, they're background. And that realization settles in quietly, because it means something important. If you stayed here long enough, this would become your normal too. You pass another figure, then another, each carrying their own small part of the environment with them. None of it stands out anymore. It just blends, layer upon layer. You glance ahead, noticing the street beginning to shift again, slightly more enclosed, slightly darker.